Are you referring to the conversation when I said we perceive a world?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So did you understand what?
I did understand, but partially. But if you could throw some examples in it, and
all right. So let's start with a conventional point of view, in which it is believed that there is a world out there made out of stuff called matter, which is viewed by our mind. So we believe, I perceive the world, and we believe that our perception of the world is a pretty good indication of the way the world actually is. In other words, if we were not perceiving the world, it would still look exactly the same as it looks to us if we were perceiving it. So the first step we take is to recognize that all we know of the world, and by the world I'm not talking in the abstract, I mean this room, this room, your current experience of the world is this room. So we start by understanding that all we know of this room is our current perception. Yes, for instance, if you were to fall asleep now, perception would come to an end and the room would vanish. So we can't be sure that we are having a perception of this room. We can only be sure that we're having a perception. The of this room is presumed. Gotcha. We presume that there is a room, or indeed a world, outside perception. But in fact, nobody has ever come in contact with the world outside their five sense perceptions: seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. So instead of saying there is a perception of the world, it would be more accurate just to say there is a perception.
Okay.
Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Every perception that you have is known. Yes? Mm-hmm. So at any moment there is the knowing of your perception. Could you ever have a perception independent of knowing?
No.
If you were to remove knowing from your current perception, what would remain of your perception?
Nothing.
Nothing. It's like in the previous step, if we remove perception from the world, what would remain of our experience of the world? Nothing.
Nothing.
So we can't even be sure that there is an independent object called perception, because all we know of that perception is knowing.
Okay.
So in fact, the only substance present in perception is knowing or consciousness. Yes? If you were to touch the stuff that perception is made of, perception is obviously made out of mind stuff. Yeah? It's not made out of anything solid. If you were to try to touch now your current perception, what would you touch? What's the stuff that you would touch?
Nothing to touch. Just
Sorry?
vacuum, empty place, space.
Yes, but there is something. A perception is not nothing.
Okay.
There is something there. A perception is made of something. It has some reality to it. It has some substance to it. But and you are experiencing perception now. Mm-hmm. So if you are experiencing it, you must be experiencing the stuff it is made of. Yes?
Yes.
So what is the stuff that perception is made of?
Is that their consciousness?
Perfect, consciousness, knowing or consciousness.
Okay.
So actually, if we look at our experience of anything, and we go very deeply into it, make this exploration that we've just made, the only substance we find in experience is consciousness or knowing.
Okay.
So just as it's not a perception of the world, but it is just perception, so it is not the knowing of a perception, it is just knowing.
Okay.
So when we reduce the world to perception, we reduce matter to mind. And when we reduced perception to knowing, we reduce mind to consciousness.
Okay.
And then if you hold that understanding and now go back to any experience you like, but remain with this understanding that knowing or consciousness is the stuff out of which experience is made, you will see that whatever you encounter in your experience is made only of the knowing of it.
Yes, it makes sense, and I'm getting it, I'm understanding it. But when you go back into the real world and back to my office
well, when you say go back into the real world, I'm talking about the real world. The real world is the world made out of consciousness. The imaginary world, what you refer to as the real world, is the world made out of stuff called matter that nobody has ever found. It is pure imagination. It is the imaginary world.
Okay.
The real world is the real world that we actually experience. And if we look at the experience, nobody now is experiencing anything other than consciousness. Can anybody now point to anything in their experience that is made out of anything other than knowing? Have any of you ever experienced anything? Or could you ever experience anything that was made out of anything other than knowing or consciousness? That is the real world.
I see matter in my experience really existing. Well, maybe that's the wrong word, but I see it. I experience matter evolving. It is real to me. If I hit my head, break my arm, if I bleed, there are consequences. I am clearly only consciousness. I get that. But matter is still with me.
The implication of this understanding is not that your feelings don't matter, your body doesn't matter, your relationships don't matter. This approach is not a denial or rejection of life, of experience, but it's an upgrade of experience. Experience in a way becomes more significant, not less significant. For instance, we can only be unkind to someone that we believe is separate from ourselves. So what would the effect of this recognition be on the quality of our relationships? Does it render relationships insignificant? No, not at all. There is an increase in empathy and love, and I'm not suggesting that there isn't an evolution of the mind, or that the mind doesn't evolve according to certain patterns or laws. I'm saying in the ultimate analysis that there is no such stuff called matter. Even contemporary physics now, physicists have been looking for this stuff called matter for centuries.
So how can it
the more they look for it, the less like matter becomes.
How can it evolve then?
In the same way that a piece of music can evolve in a structured way. A piece of music is not made out of matter, it's made out of mind. And there can be an evolution of a piece of music, and that evolution can be structured. It can obey certain laws. For instance, it can obey the laws of Western harmony and unfold according to those laws, all made of mind. Your own thoughts go back to when you first started learning mathematics as a 4-year-old boy or 5-year-old boy. Your mind evolved. Your mind was conditioned by your teachers to think in a certain way, and as a result of that conditioning, your mind evolved and was able to understand more and more complex ideas, mathematical ideas. So there was an evolution of your mind.
We are conceiving of matter, and that conception is evolving.
Exactly.
It's clear to me that matter need not exist, that it is entirely an energetic function. You know, when I hit something, two materials together, I understand that those are two near field effects of energy becoming close and rejecting each other. And that it's one, and everything is effect. You can't have a bee without a flower. You cannot also have a garden without a flower. You can't, I mean, it goes on forever. We're all one big event, not even a thing, an ongoing energetic pattern, flow, energy, ocean of infinite one thing moving and evolving.
But you say a flow, but a flow of what? What is the stuff that is flowing? That indivisible whole, it must be made of, let's call it something. Something is there. In this experience, you're quite right. You're not now having, how many objects are there in this room? If we were to list every tiny object in this room, let's say we'd end up with 10,000 things. Are you now having 10,000 experiences, or are you having one experience? Please just say you're having one experience now.
I am having one experience, and also that
and
they all came from one thing.
If you look at your experience at any time in your life, when you're at Wembley watching the cup final and there are 80,000 people in the crowd. Sorry, I don't know the equivalent in California, but are you having 80,000 experiences? Or are you having one experience? We are always only having one experience. It's the mind that divides that single experience into a multiplicity and diversity of objects. But actually experience is always one. So the question is, what is that single experience that is always being experienced? What is it made of? Experience is always made of the same stuff. Whatever you're experiencing, it is experience. And experience must be made of the same stuff. What is it made of? It's made of something. And if we are experiencing it, we must be experiencing what it is made of. So what is your experience made of? What is the single stuff that your current experience and every experience you've ever had is made of?
Well, I would say it's what I am conscious of, but that's not exactly true. It's just consciousness.
Exactly, because when you say it's what I am conscious of, you introduce I and what I am conscious of. But that is not your experience. Are you having two experiences now or one experience? You're having one experience. Your experience is not divided into I and other. You're having one experience. And if you ask yourself at any time, whatever experience you're having, am I having 10,000 experiences or even just two experiences? Or is experience always one? We have to say, we have to admit, experience is always one. And what is it made of? It doesn't even make sense to say if you are having an experience as if you and experience were two different things. You cannot separate experience from yourself. Experience is made of something. And whatever that something is experiencing whatever is being experienced. It's consciousness. You cannot go further back in your experience than consciousness. You cannot get behind consciousness and say, oh, consciousness appears and disappears. It is, all experience can be reduced to, let me ask you the question in another way round. Is there anything to your experience other than the knowing of it?
No, I'm completely with you on this point. So my question, let me circle back and ask the question again. I get it that we could create all manner of horrendous things if we were to treat other beings as separate, that we were not them. We could force them into slavery, we could make them poor, we could, horrible things can happen from separateness.
Yes, and always does come from separateness.
And we see that, that's our experience.
Yes.
I do it to myself, my friends, and I don't do it to myself. Why?
Okay.
Nope. Why would we create such a thing?
Okay. Yes. This why question is perfectly legitimate. And you see, separation is the price of manifestation. If there is to be manifestation, it has to be known from the point of view of a separate subject of experience. Therefore, duality is implicit in manifestation. And where there is duality, there is separation. Therefore, separation is the price of manifestation. And that is why all people, without exception, live with this existential wound in themselves. This wound doesn't come from something that did or didn't happen to them. That compounds the wound, but the essential wound is there, and it's the wound of separation. Going back to Mary and Jane, irrespective of how good her life is, Jane feels something is missing. I long for something. I long for my home. Something, my relationship is perfect, my health is perfect, my work life is perfect, my family, everything is, but still, in spite of all of that, I still feel something is missing. It's because Jane feels that she is limited. And this feeling of being limited, she is cut off from her true nature. She doesn't know that she is Mary, and therefore she doesn't feel the peace and the fulfillment that comes from the knowledge, I am Mary. So however good her life is, she still feels something is missing. And all her friends say to her, but you've got everything. How could you be unhappy? And she's unhappy because she feels, I am limited. I am separate, and nothing I acquire, no relationship, no object, no substance, ever puts an end to my sense of separation or fragmentation. So this feeling of being separate is innate in each of us, and it's because of this feeling. So you can do two things with this feeling of separation. You can either go inwards and explore the self that seems to be separate. That's what we do here. But the vast majority of people go outwards and try to alleviate the pain or this wound of separation through the acquisition of objects, substances, relationships, etc. Until sooner or later we realize our search for fulfillment and peace through objects fails us. It fails us sufficiently often. And at some point, either spontaneously or through reading a book or meeting a friend, this new possibility is suggested to us.
Is it necessary to manifest? Did it just come about because infinity was bored, as it says in the Hindu tradition?
No, because the feeling of boredom is already in manifestation.
So why is it necessary
it's
to
infinity,
have manifestation?
The infinite consciousness cannot be bored. Only a finite mind can be bored.
So why create any of that?
Well, as I said before, it is innate in itself that this vibration Consciousness is not just static, inert, silent. It has the ability to move, and every movement has a certain frequency and amplitude. Therefore, all movement has a limitation to it, or a form to it. Therefore, as soon as consciousness starts vibrating within itself, limitation appears. All objective experience is innate in potential in consciousness, and it is realized through, or actualized through, the agency of a finite mind. And the reason, just to go back to your first question about how is it possible to do harm to another, it's because when we feel this sense of separation, we feel cut off from the other. And when we feel cut off from the other, there are two basic ways of relating to the other. Either we want something from them in order to complete or fulfill ourselves, or we feel threatened by them because we feel that we are a fragment, so we feel hostile towards them. And that is why all conflict and cruelty and war all comes from the feeling of separation. And however we rearrange our politics and our borders and conflict and war, it will go on until the ultimate cause of it is recognized in more than just small groups of people like this, which is the sense of separation. That is the only place where conflict can be ultimately resolved. The way I described it this morning was, and this is a limitation of language, I have to describe it as a linear process. You go from the solid body, made out of matter, to sensing, which is made out of mind, to pure knowing, which is consciousness. Kind of one after the other. But a good metaphor for this is, it's the screen again, but it's not our magical screen, it's a conventional TV screen. So forget the normal way I use the screen metaphor. This is a completely different metaphor. You're watching TV, there are three people watching TV. Sitting on the sofa, they're watching the movie. And it's a thriller. And a friend comes in and says to them, "Oh, what are you looking at?" One of them says, I'm watching these guys, they're about to rob a bank. The second person says, I'm watching a movie. The third person says, I'm seeing a screen. They're all describing the same experience. They're all seeing the same thing. One of them sees a gang of men robbing a bank. The other is watching a story, a movie. The third is seeing a screen. So these three they're not sequential in time, the way I described them this morning. You have to see them stacked up on top of each other. And so you look at the current, in this case, because we were exploring the body, you look at the current experience of the body, and first of all you see the guys robbing the bank, then you see it as a movie, then you see it as a screen. You're always looking at the same thing. You never stop looking at the same thing. It doesn't change from being guys robbing a bank to a movie to a screen. It's always what it is. Reality never ceases to be itself, irrespective of what the mind superimposes upon it. So with the body, the experience of the body, the experience that we call the body is what it is, irrespective of our interpretation. So we give it these three different interpretations: body, mind, and pure knowing. Body, sensing, which is a form of mind, and pure knowing. And we notice how, although we're experiencing the same thing, our experience seems to change in accordance with the way we look. If we look in one way, we see an object, a solid, inert body. If we look at exactly the same experience in another way, we see mind, sensing. And if we look in a third way, we see only knowing. Knowing knows only knowing. So in just the same way that the bank robbery, the movie, and the screen are not three separate things. They are three different ways of seeing. What we were doing this morning, we weren't experiencing three different objects. They were three different ways of knowing.
And it feels that way right now.
And sorry, just to finish up, you're right that in the end, what, from a conventional point of view, seems to be an obvious experience made out of matter and mind. That seems to be obvious, ordinary, that our experience is just made out of matter and mind. When we become accustomed to knowing only the knowing of our experience, in time, over time, it becomes as obvious and as ordinary to know only knowing as it once was to know a multiplicity and diversity of objects. We get accustomed to watching the movie knowing that all we ever see is a screen. It becomes ordinary. It just becomes regular life. Sahaja samadhi, just regular, ordinary life.
Listening to your response right now, or your comment, comes to my mind that the sense of a bit of work that I felt on focusing from knowing into sensation, because I can perceive in this precise moment that they're all overlapped or simultaneous.
Yes.
It's a labeling of kind of concentrating on it. That was the little piece of work, like saying, okay,
yes,
kind of forget about awareness for a bit.
Yes.
So but that forgetting is...
But that's it. So do that. Make the effort. Try to no longer know knowing and instead know sensing. Because that's the exercise. Yes. And then we try to stop knowing sensing, mind, and we go back to knowing in the ordinary sense. We know a body. We may know something solid. And it's good to go back and forth. The reason I go back and forth like this is for us to become very familiar and very comfortable with seeing these three different ways of knowing, so we can really see in our experience how the same reality appears as matter, appears as mind, and appears as knowing. So if you need to make the effort, that's fine, just make the effort.
Yes. It was somewhat of a reflection also on how that's presenting itself in my everyday life, because as I started attending these teachings and marveling myself at the sensation of the self and the sensation and perceptions in that kind of intermediary realm, took on some period of time while I was doing that, and I was having a lot of fun, walking on the sidewalk or wherever, and just marveling at what I thought was solid and rigid, and now it's clearly not, and it's not separate. And then it transitioned kind of into that ordinary, everyday
yes.
Aspect of more knowing. But as you say, the others don't disappear altogether.
Yes, but the marveling doesn't stop. It's like it's no longer... when you're first walking down the street and you realize all I'm experiencing is seeing and hearing and touching, and it's all that takes place in me. I mean, that's so exciting you can hardly contain yourself. But after that becomes familiar, you still marvel at it, but you no longer get overexcited by it. So it's like when we see that all of this, all of our experience, is all that's shining in our experience is pure consciousness. This experience and all experience, the light it shines with is the light of pure knowing. We stand in awe in front of that fact. But the marveling is a kind of quiet marveling at this majestic fact of experience, that all of this, it's shining with the light of knowing. That's all we are experiencing. It's all it is experiencing, but it has the capacity to take the shape of all of this. It's like a kind of quiet marveling that sometimes bubbles over, and takes your breath away, and then it just goes back again to this kind of quiet reverence for all experience.
Yes.
So it becomes ordinary, but it's not ordinary in the sense it's extraordinary and ordinary.
Yes,
it's ordinary, but that doesn't take the awe out of it, the majesty out of it, the beauty out of it. The next part of this exploration is called lunch. And I will leave it to Rilke, the poet Rilke, to describe how to proceed with the investigation. Plump apple, smooth banana, melon, peach, gooseberry, how all this affluence speaks life and death into the mouth. I sense, observe it from a child's transparent features while he tastes. What miracle is happening in your mouth? Instead of words, discoveries flow out from the ripe fruit, astonished to be free. Dare to say what apple truly is. This sweetness, at first thick, dark, dense, then exquisitely lifted in your taste, close clarified, awake, luminous. Oh, knowledge, pleasure, inexhaustible.